Councillor Nixon. All those in favor? Motion's carried. And we don't have anything else other than we are moving right into 6A, which is our development cost charge bylaw. And what I would like to do is, rather than bringing a motion on the floor, I want to open up the floor for any comments, discussion, questions from council. And then I will be asking for a motion if council is so inclined. So the floor is open to council for comments or questions. Councilor Brothers.
I might as well start it off. I think I mentioned to a few people this morning that I am struggling with the numbers, not necessarily the single-family home numbers, but I'm struggling with the commercial and with the industrial, and I really don't have a handle on those, and it's of concern to me. One of the things that in reviewing all of the documentation, I went back and we got an email from Randy Singh, from Matt Singh, about the DCCs that we're proposing with respect to commercial and with respect, well, in particular with respect to commercial. And he gave us a guideline list of what other communities are doing. What struck me from looking at that is that the number that we are now proposing is way out of line with what other people are doing and other communities are doing. In particular, he mentions Penticton. They're at $40 a square meter, and I think we're at somewhere over 100.
I think it's 102.
102. So, and Fernie was at 109, and he went and phoned them up, and he found out that in 2015 they reduced them to 61. So it's of concern to me, because not only is it a process whereby we have to make sure we can afford what we're doing, and we have to make sure that not only the developers can afford it, but also the population can afford the result of all of this. But one of the purposes of doing this is to make sure that we encourage and we have an environment that allows for investment. And so I'm concerned because I really don't have a good handle on what we're doing and whether, and the impact of what we're doing. And it's just because from my perspective, single-family homes, I get it. In my brain, I get it. But from a commercial point of view, I don't know, looking at the numbers, whether these numbers, a developer will say, well, you know what, geez, when I can build for a lot cheaper in some other community, that's what I'm going to do. I won't build here, I'll build somewhere else. And that is my fear, and that is what I'm struggling with, because I don't have a handle. I don't have a comfort level for that. And I'd rather not make a decision than make the wrong decision.
Anybody else want to say anything? Maybe they can get an applause too?
Thank you, Your Worship. One of the things we do on the first day here when we sign up for council is take an oath, and one of the core responsibilities I feel is maintaining and planning for infrastructure. And I think when you do that, when you commit to that, there's a realization that you're going to take some lumps doing that, because no one wants to pay for pipes and roads and sewer and all that type of infrastructure, but it costs, and it costs a lot, and we have to find a way to pay for that. And this is the city has estimated $700 to $900 million in infrastructure. This bylaw covers a portion of the future needs that the city will require. So, that's the starting point for the DCC bylaw process, is, recognition that, most of our infrastructure is very old, older than me, and that we're going to have to find ways to replace the infrastructure, and specifically with this bylaw to deal with new growth-related infrastructure. We started off in the DCC process in April. We've had many, many meetings over it and gone through the process. I think one of the key challenges for me is that we've heard a lot from interested parties, people with commercial interests, etc. Of course, it's great to hear from them, but in terms of telling the story of the infrastructure deficit and the needs that we have over the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years to the general public who are taxpayers, ratepayers, property ratepayers. I don't think we've done enough to engage that major stakeholder in this issue. And certainly as we've done things like adjust the municipal assist factor for the sewer, that has big implications for them as well. And in a sense, as we try and go through this process and look at, best practices for implementing the DCC bylaw, I feel it leaves council in a really difficult position because you're really hearing very strongly from one side of, the stakeholder group and missing out from quite a few others. I guess, at this point in seeing the latest iteration of the DCC bylaw, I still have quite a few concerns. I'm happier that single-family and multi-family rates are closer to where I think they could be. But I share the same concerns as Councillor Brothers mentioned earlier with, industrial and institutional rates. Best practices point specifically to avoiding massive percentage increases, and that's what we still have in front of us for these two different categories. I feel that theoretically, and no one here has a crystal ball, but theoretically and with study, we can find rates that are ideal, and that when we put new DCC development rates on across the different project categories here, it does have a dampening effect. How much of a dampening effect, is a question. It's something that definitely could be studied, but I guess my concern is that the case hasn't been made to me that at this point that these numbers are ideal. And it also, I feel in a difficult position that because so many of the underlying calculations that go into this process are complex. You have many variables, and you change one, you take one project off the list, you adjust the growth percentage by a little bit, everything else changes, and you don't really know until you've crunched all the numbers and done the math on any particular scenario what you're going to get out of this. So to approach this bylaw at this stage in sort of a line item fashion, for example, by adjusting one of the key variables such as projects on the project list, municipal assist factor, or growth percentages, doesn't really I can't really see a process whereby we sit at the table today and get the answer to that. This is the ideal one. And I'm concerned still that with especially industrial, institutional, and commercial rates that, we're a bit unclear as to what the effect of these rates that we're seeing right now are going to have. One issue that's often raised in correspondence that I get about this is, debates over the growth rate, which is more or less set at 1% according to the DCC bylaw. I'm fairly bullish about Revelstoke's future. There's, a lot of things in the pike, and I'm concerned that what we've seen in the past is not necessarily what we're going to see in the near-term future. So I guess to summarize, it seems quite difficult at this point to go through an iterative process where we roll up our sleeves and say how let's do this, let's do that, let's change this, because really for me, in order to be satisfied with that process, we need to bring this back to the table again another time, which is really what I think we need to see at this point. So I'm looking to see other councillors' thoughts, the mayor and other councillors' thoughts on where they want to go with this. But I just feel that through this process, which I have supported, engaging in the process and continuing through it over the past few months, I've always seen a path to getting to something that's ideal. But we see the window closing a little bit, the ability to get to that point from here seems difficult, or definitely seems like it's going to take more time than the current process that we have laid before us.
Councillor Nixon?
I just want to talk about how the perception that we take projects out and that we also are going to look at the projected population. We cannot take projects out and boost the population because that's an oxymoron. The projects were not taken out, they were just deferred, and they will come back to this table for the next council to have a look at and see how they're going to move ahead with those projects. And I can't emphasize enough, we've said it at this table, you've said it yourself, your worship, we cannot count grant money until that check is in our hand. And I think people are saying we're not looking other places for money to pay for these projects. And that's just the way it is at the ministry level, and those are the guidelines. And the DCCs are not a perfect tool. They came in the late 50s under the Socreds, under Premier Bennett Sr. They got tweaked and fixed in the late 70s under Premier Bennett Jr. This is not a socialist construct. It is a tool to help with people that are welcome to come to our community with their capital. And we're pleased to see people coming to Revelstoke with their capital. Armour is going to be doing some great things. I just think that we need to believe in Revelstoke. And if you're nervous about that commercial rate and you're nervous about that industrial rate, we need to ask the next council to look at how they would bring that down. And one of the options the next council can be looking at is they could be looking at measuring the use of water, looking at metering, and looking at who's using the utility. And so do you want to pay for metering water, or do you want to pay a one-time cost for a DCC? And I think I really want to go on public record that any grant that comes in for that sewer needs to go to the city of Revelstoke. The city of Revelstoke is all the citizens of Revelstoke and the ratepayers for the sewer. We need to remember the little old lady that isn't here today, other than me. She sits on 4th Street, her house is paid for. And how much can we ask her to increase her utility payments so that the other side of the equation is not paying as much one time? And she's paying month after month after month on a limited income. So I think that we have rolled our sleeves up. We have made a dance here, and it's not perfect, but I think that we cannot leave this to the next council to deal with. We need to, we've got elected to come to the table to represent everybody. We all believe in Revelstoke. We all think it's great. The amount of things that have taken off in the last 4 years has been phenomenal. And not just with private capital, but with our capital projects that our engineering department has got so many grants in. Look at the Big Eddy Water, look at the roundabout out at the highway. You know, things have happened, and it's not just private capital that's made it happen, it's a good team at City Hall that has made it happen. And I know there's been a lot of negative comments, but we've heard also from some of our citizens, smart young men in our town that have born and raised here and educated, that are saying we're on the right track. And we're not hearing as much from the community at large because the people of Revelstoke don't want this to become a us and them event. They want us at this table to make a decision based on what's best for the whole community.
Okay. Councillor Sauls?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you all for your contributions. I want to thank the community for their contributions. We've heard what you've said. In some cases, we may not wholeheartedly agree, but that doesn't mean that your voice isn't important to us. Getting back to this thing, as Councillor Nixon has just alluded to, we are charged at this table to do what's best for the community as a whole. And we appreciate the fact that we've had many iterations of this, and the staff have done what they could to remove things that are not, that we're not ready to move forward to. I'm concerned over industrial, institutional, those sorts of costs, but I'm also thinking that had this been in the queue and dealt with every year or 2 years in the past, we wouldn't be in this situation where it's such a drastic move upward. I know we can't fetter future councils by saying, look at this in 2 years' time or a year's time and make the appropriate changes, but the word to the wise would be the future councils need to look at this in a more timely fashion than what's been done in the past, just because change is so quick now. And if we were to go forward with this now, it's the best, or what we believe to be the best for today. However, that doesn't mean that a year or two down the road that there couldn't be a better improved DCC rate, depending on what's happening in the community at the time. So I look at this, I'm grateful for the engineering staff and what the consultants have done to put some of the stuff off, and I don't know if you want Mr. Thomas to explain some of the projects that he's put off, or just go with what is before us now, assuming that everyone's read that. Just for public record, that, and we're not talking about taking them off the table, as Councillor Nixon has said, just deferring them down the line. And that's what I'm thinking at this point.
Well, just I want to remind council that staff and the consultant are here. If there's questions or clarification that council needs, then all they have to do is ask the question.
And, I would like to make a couple of comments, and when you look at where we were when we started this thing to where we are today, this is the natural evolution of the process. We get a consultant, we don't want anything sugar-coated, we want to have a look at the whole stinking mess, and that's what we got. We got comments back from the public, and lots of them. Council looked at a lot of this stuff, the staff looked at it, consultant questions went back and forth, and which is what council is supposed to be doing. And we've had 2 iterations of that bylaw, development cost charge bylaw coming forward. And I guess what I look at is that, people perceive me as the development guy and the business guy, but, we're here representing the whole community. And, we have a lot of people in the audience, and a lot of people that are my friends, and some may not be my friends anymore after, depending on what happens today. And that's the problem with sitting at this table, is that you're here representing and doing what you think is the best for the whole community. And I'm looking at the changes, and quite frankly, I think that we've gone to the taxpayer and the user a lot on this development cost charge bylaw. You go through the projects and you look at the purpose of it is preparing the community for the future. It's the development community, and it's the user, and what kind of community are we envisioning in the future? And I think that staff and the consultant have done a good job. I think council has done a great job. You're pushing, you're asking questions, and you're trying to come up with what's fair for everybody. And maybe if nobody likes it, that's probably the fairest thing. But all the comments coming in, and there's hundreds of them, and a lot of them are piled up in similar categories, and they ask the same questions, and the questions that we're asking. And I'm not sure if council needs clarification on the population number, on the industrial, but I actually feel and believe that we are at a reasonable crossroad for this development cost charge bylaw. And knowing that the benefits to the community are in the future, and the more it gets put off and deferred and not dealt with, the worse off that we're going to be. And nobody wants that. And we could say, well, we should have been doing this every couple of years. Well, you got to look at the last 8 years, and when there is no development, do you introduce increases in development cost charges every year, every second year, when there is nothing going on? we're in an era of expansion and development, and people want to be here, businesses want to be here, and to be here, they have to be serviced. This is going to be a requirement. I think that there's something else that we should be thinking about, and we've just put in an application for a $10 million sewage treatment grant, and that's not in here, in this development cost charge bylaw, because you cannot put in grants that you don't have. We have a couple of grants, they're in here. We've applied for another one. If we're successful, there will be a minor adjustment to the development cost charge bylaw when it goes into effect in June 1st, and that $10 million will be taken into consideration if it's successful. But I think we also have to look at, I think it's fair to say that governments help those that help themselves. So let's cancel the whole thing, forget about it, put our head in the sand and not deal with it. And so then we go to the government and say, well, we got a big problem here, we need this. And they go, what have you done about it? Well, actually, we've done nothing. Well, maybe they'll say that's what we'll do too.
Yeah.
And then where are we going to be? So, this is not perfect for everybody. It's probably not perfect for anybody, but I think that it's the closest that we've got, and I'm in favor of moving forward. And that's all I got right now. Councillor Brothers.
I'd like to explore, my comment today was sort of a request from the rest of council or from staff to say, is there some way that I can be comforted on those levels? Because I think they are high. And given the fact that our taxes for commercial and industrial are quite high as well, it's sort of a double whammy in terms of encouraging people to come here and develop. And I get what you're saying, Your Worship. We're making our best effort. I'm not too sure what's the process if we pass this today, and we say, okay, next council will take a look at it. What would the process be? Do they have to start all over again? Is it a minor process? Is it a major process? But I really have a concern of putting these numbers up for the world to see that will scare development in this community. That is what is of concern to me.
Well, the process today is that if council is in mind to approve this, it would then go to the ministry to look at all the numbers, the process, and they have been following this thing right from day one, watching, and they'll go through their process to see if we've met all the criteria. And like I said, they've been watching it all along, and as far as I know, there's been no red flags brought up. Then they would, if they feel that the process was followed and everything is reasonable, they would approve it. They would then come back to council for final reading and adoption.
Yeah, but my question is if the next council, if we pass this and it goes and it's fine, and the next council says, oh my gosh, that was a big mistake, it's really damaging our commercial activity and our development activity, what would happen? Could the next council, do they really have to go through this whole process again, or is it a simple amendment?
Mr. Thomas?
Worship, I think the answers to that can be found in 8.6 of the background report. It talks about the minor amendment and the major amendment process. The minor amendment generally, and obviously this is all subject to what the province would actually allow you to include in what they would consider a minor amendment, but things like inflation, so this is what I think Councillor Saltz was talking about, looking at it every 1 or 2 years to deal with inflation, make sure that you're keeping up with the cost of doing these projects. Land values, if land is included in it. Changes in construction costs, so on top of inflation, if you now have a new cost estimate for the project because you're further along in your design, you can include that. The last one is the status of government grants, which is what the Mayor was referring to. When, if we're successful with this $10 million grant, that would be to include that or to change the bylaw to include the grant somehow. That would be a minor amendment. The next section talks about major amendments, and these are things like the underlying DCC assumptions, broad policy considerations, development projections, DCC program costs overall, timing of proposed capital projects, addition of new projects to the DCC program where necessary, and deletion from the DCC project of those capital projects that have been completed are no longer required. So it may not be as big a major project as this one today if it was done in the near future, but if in 5 years' time it was obvious that something wasn't right with what was in the currently proposed bylaw, it would be an exercise similar to what we've done now in terms of scope and cost and the requirement to get consultants in to do this. And again, the other part, I believe the main difference between the minor and major amendments is the amount of consultation that's expected with the development community. So minor amendment, obviously, it's much more of a routine process. Once you start talking about adding or removing projects or the timelines of things or the underlying assumptions, then that would be something that you'd want to make sure you're following the major process.
Just a general question. In understanding the fact that we had $35 million on the budget for the sewer treatment plant, but we're deciding to go in a phased route whereby the first part of it would be $13 million, and then in the next, then we don't anticipate we won't have anything to do for the next 10 to 20 years, I think you said. Is there some way that we can just put the number of $13 million down as opposed to $35 million?
That would be delaying a project, and I think we've shown that even with the growth estimate of 1%, and even with the $13 million project, I'll back up. The $13 million project is not the end of the story for the sewer treatment plant. That will not meet the provincial wastewater effluent requirements. So the $30 million project gets us on a path towards meeting that effluent requirement, and it would be subject to a liquid waste management plan where the province agreed that we were on a path to meeting that specific requirement. The ultimate cost of to meet that full requirement is somewhere around $33 to $36 million in our current estimate. I think I've mentioned before there's other communities of similar size to us that are now up around $70 million for their sewer treatment plant. And I think we've got to be very careful about preempting what the outcomes of the liquid waste management plan process are, but what we've done with the grant application is staged it in a way that we've shown that we fully intend to meet that future requirement, and we expect that the province would be amenable to the fact that we were on a path to full compliance in the future. So I don't think it would be wise to be pulling the rest of the sewer projects out of the DCC bylaw. I think that would show, similar to the Mayor's comment, it would show the province that we're not actually committed to doing that project.
Which was what my question was going to be, is there a possibility the government could look at an application like that
as not fulfilling the mandate and not fulfilling all of the criteria for the DCC bylaw? And
Possibly.
Councilor Brothers.
I've been thinking about this a lot. Is there a way of dealing with in this process of dealing with the commercial and the industrial, independent of everybody else? Is there something we can do with commercial and industrial to soften that blow without affecting everything else?
Well, you can reduce projects, you can change the municipal assist factor.
That will affect everything, right?
That will affect everything.
That's what I wonder, is whether we can do it independently. No.
Lisa?
The answer to that is we actually did talk to the ministry about independently adjusting numbers, and it's not possible. They provide a framework. You've seen the tables, and there's a reason they look the same province-wise, because that's the framework. So once you input the information, the projects, and the growth rate, and lots of other factors, it sets the rates, and it has to do with growth with the projects and also service areas. So the reason that industrial in Area 1 is a lot higher than industrial in Area 2 is Area 1 has very little industrial growth that is projected. so very little piece of the pie that's expected to be collected, as well as it has water and sewer service. So there's not a way to do that besides exactly what the mayor said, which is removing, affecting the entire rate structure.
Councillor Nixon.
The next council could look at ways to help commercial and industrial by looking at the BC Energy Step Code, like working with UBCM when you go down there and looking at what the province is planning for that, and looking at people building green and getting incentives for that, maybe offset some of the DCC costs. Like the next council has a lot of work on their plate and a lot of direction they can go around green building.
I just feel that the biggest opportunity that we have to adjust rates is by having the projects in there and then one by one applying for grants where we can, like we're doing with the sewage treatment plant. And as those projects get grants and they get built, they then have a minor amendment and these projects get taken off of the DCC bylaw. So I'm expecting that all things being equal is that this whole
Bylaw should be reviewed every few years and adjustments being made. I think that we've had a little bit of a go-around. I would like to see if anyone is prepared to put the first part of the motion on board, and knowing that if they are, we'll be taking the motion in second reading, and then I will be asking for an amendment if council is so inclined. So it's, the first one would be development cost charge bylaw 2234 be read a second time, and that would be it. And then I would be asking for a seconder, and then I would be asking for an amendment.
Your worship, I'll bring forward that development cost charges bylaw number 2234 be read a second time.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Sauls. I would like to ask for an amendment that the development cost charge bylaw 2234 be amended at second reading. Amended, and I need a seconder for that amendment. Councillor Sauls. There's discussion on the amendment only right now, and it's to amend it to the tables that are adjusted from the previous first reading that we did. Is everybody understanding what we're talking about here? Is there any comments or questions on the amendment? Yes.
Just a question. If we turn down the amendment, what happens?
Well, I would be encouraging to turn down the motion then, because the motion has higher development cost charge rates than the amendment does. Councillor Sauls.
Sure. When I look at these rates that we have before us now, if we put through what we have in front of us now, even though it's not perfect, we have something with which we can work, a base with which we can work with, or the next council has to deal with it. If we don't go with this route and the whole process has to be started again with the next council, or it goes through the next council, that's everyone's choice. I'm thinking at this present time, we have something here that at least we can work from, and that whether I was elected to the next council or someone else was elected to the next council, they can look at it, look at what's going on in the community at the time, and then basically say either this was a good choice, or if it wasn't a good choice, then they can roll it back or amend it by going through the proper processes with the province at that time.
And just to respond to that, and, you know, because I'm just dialoguing here, what I heard from Mr. Thomas is that if somehow, you know, these numbers for commercial and for industrial are a disaster, or not good at all, and we need to change that, that will be a major amendment, which will be, in effect, going through the whole process all over again.
Not necessarily. It depends on what the amendment is. If it's, and I'll let you answer the question, but
Your Worship, if this, amendment, as you said, with say the commercial rates are too high, and in the next couple of years the council decides that, the province would take into consideration all of the stakeholder feedback that has happened now, and any new stakeholder feedback. It's when you get to the 5-year timeframe that it really, like that major amendment is another major exercise. I think it's just, there is still an obligation that you're going to go through the whole process, but many of the underlying assumptions, if they're not changing, I think, the province is going to be pretty amenable to having a simple major amendment process from the city, and that would certainly be something that we'd be looking at, from a staff perspective. We wouldn't expect to be, it to be a lengthy or costly process to do that, but there are statutory requirements that still need to be met. I think if that were to happen, it would certainly be, the province would be asking why you're making that change, and they would want evidence as to why you are choosing to do this now, so soon after a bylaw's been adopted. But if you have been able to gather evidence to show that that change is justified, I can't see the province having a huge issue with it being a fairly simple process.
And I think that also part of that was that when grant applications are successful, they would be an amendment to the DCC bylaw as well.
We have an amendment on the floor as a motion. Is there any other comments about the amendment? Is everybody clear what we're talking about? All those in favor? Motion is carried. We have an amended motion on the floor. And the amended motion is that development cost charge 2234 be read a second time as amended. Any comment, Councillor Sells?
I'll bring that forward.
No, it is on the floor, and the original mover and seconder, because it's now been amended.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I really think that, again, we've heard from, the community, but also we need these projects to go forward, and we need to be able to fund these projects. This isn't perfect. We know it's not perfect, but we just applied for a grant. If we don't do something moving towards that, I think the province, that grant's going to be maybe not put through. And I'm concerned about those sorts of things moving forward.
Any other comments on the amended motion? Councillor Nando.
Your worship, a question through staff, just to jog my memory, what is the breakdown for sewage treatment plant phase 1 in terms of plans for borrowing or plans for revenue generation in the short term through reserve funding?
Your worship, of the 13-point-something million dollars worth of projects, we've applied for almost $10 million of that in grant funding. I would have to pull up the previous memo that I wrote on that, but my expectation is that when we find out about the grant, that would be something that we would be looking at choosing how we're going to fund it then as part of the recommendation to council. The Director of Finance and I, we've talked about, do we include this project now? Do we include, in our capital plans, and how do we show funding for that? Do we start raising sewer rates for the beginning of 2019, or do we defer that because we know that we're not actually going to start the project until sometime in 2019 if the grant's successful? If the grant's not successful, we'll continue with design work, but we will not be constructing a new sewer treatment plant in 2019 unless something major happens. So I think this is certainly something that I would encourage the next council to really dig into, to work out how we would fund that remaining $3-point-something million, as well as looking at the rest of the total sewer package for the next 20 years, which that sewer treatment plant package is up around $33 to $36 million total. So ultimately, yes, we'd love to see grant funding for most of that, but I think realistically we're probably not going to get more than 50% grant funding for a $30-something million project in total. So the city is going to have to find funding for the remainder of it, whether that's so some of that will come from DCC, some of that will come from the ratepayers, and so we just have to work out how much should go to each portion. And I think that's That's the most challenging part, is probably working out, if we're successful in a $10 million grant, how much of that $10 million should go towards offsetting the cost from the ratepayer, and how much should go to the offsetting the cost to the development community. And I think that's a discussion for the next council, because we may not get $10 million, we may get less, we may get nothing. But it's a discussion for the future, I think. I think it would be great to see a $10 million grant, but we don't know at this stage.
Any other comments or questions on the amended motion, Councillor Rutledge?
I'm still reaching out to either somebody in council or somebody in staff to help me out with these high DCCs for commercial and industrial, and I just don't know the solution. I've been sort of reaching out saying, help me, how can I have a comfort level with these? And I don't, and they're high, and people seem to be saying, oh yeah, they're high, but we can fix them up later. And I don't know, that to me is not a comfort level, you know?
So, well, let's talk about industrial rates. So, the majority of our industrial land is in Big Eddy on a West Side Road. The rate is going to be $23,000 a hectare.
Fine.
That's the majority of it right there. Okay? So, but you look at it, so you have a 5-hectare parcel of property. So does that mean I'm going to pay 5 times $23,000? No. If you're going to use 1 hectare of that property for industrial, you'll pay $23,000. The rest of the property, you will not pay industrial rate, you will not pay DCC rates on it until you're actually using that property.
I'm not so concerned about that area 2. I'm more concerned about area 1, because we're going to have, I looked at the list of industrial properties, and there's a lot of stuff on there. We're going to build some industrial stuff in area 1. We are.
Yeah. So I think that the problem with looking at the industrial rate is that it's a per hectare rate, and it's there, and I'm under the impression it's because that's what was there in the previous bylaw. I would rather it was by square meter, which is because that's what you're doing. You're doing it on the building, and you're doing it on the areas that you're using. So when you look at, well, it's $269,000 a hectare. Is that the rate? 269, yeah. But that's if you're using the hectare. If you have a 1 hectare piece of property, you think, oh, I'm going to pay $269. No, if you're using a quarter of that hectare, you're going to pay a quarter of the $269. And I think that's one of the confusing things that you look at it and you go, holy cow, that's a huge number. But you have to break it down to actually what the costs are going to be. So, commercial, I guess what I look at is the process that we're in and where we started and where we got to at, and I think it's $102 a meter. It's 104? 104. So we were at 159, 152 down to 104. So what we have, I lost the train of thought that I wanted to talk about. But what are the options for reducing that? Raising the municipal assist factor? Well, we've done that, and I think the question there we have to ask ourselves is, have we gone after the local user taxpayer enough for development projects? And I think most people around the table are saying, yeah, we have. Okay, so that's off the table, because we've done that part. We said at the first reading that we want staff and consultant to go back and look at projects and look at deferring projects and to, again, look at bringing the rate down because the rate was unacceptable at first reading. And I was one of the first guys to say that. I was not happy. It was unacceptable. Go back. They've done that. They've come back. And that's what's basically dropped the commercial rate down 32%. So what are our other options? Well, we can't put grants in there. We already know that, even though some people think that we can. We cannot put grants in to the DCC bylaw because we don't have them. So we can look at the the growth rate. Okay, we put in a 1%, and we've just had 2 reports come to council that are giving growth rates at 0.5%. I think the last 10 years, this town has a 0.22 or 0.22% growth rate every year. Provincial average is 1%. I think that's the way we're talking. But I think that it's been suggested that we raise the growth rate, which will reduce the development cost charge amount. Okay, what's the other side of that? Well, the other side of it is, we go 3% or 3.5%, so in a 20-year period, now we have a 30,000 population. Well, guess what? We probably need a bigger sewage treatment plant, we need bigger pipes to go to it, we need more water, so you don't get one offsetting without offsetting the other side. And so it gets down to, do we believe in the community and the future of the community and the growth of the community and a place that people want to be? And I do. But we have to prepare for it, because we're going to make the community worse off, and it'd be a lot easier for me to say, oh, to hell with it, I don't want to do anything, and walk down the street, thanks a lot, Mark, and you saved us a whole bunch of money. But what about the people that are coming next, and the people that want to build, and the next generation? And we have to look after the community, because I think that we will be worse off and be doing a disservice to the community if we don't. So I don't know if that helps you or not, but...
It does. A question, though, what is the number now as opposed to the 104?
150, no, it's 150.
No, the one before we were redoing these bylaws, the old one.
62?
64 and
64.
Area 1 plus RMR.
So we're putting it up $40 a square meter.
63% increase.
That's right.
63% increase.
That's high.
Well, if we had no growth, we wouldn't have to do it at all, it would be zero. Looking for any, we're still in the amended motion. I'm looking for comments and questions on the amended motion that's on the floor. Councilor Lando.
Yeah, to reiterate some of the things I said earlier and just a bit more plainly, we made some deferrals between this time and last time. That's the key difference that we've seen here. I remain unsatisfied with the process in the sense that, for example, in some of the items there, and I hate to pick on the parks, but it is the new kid on the DCC block here. We have significant financial decisions included in these ones. Some of the trails projects run, $2.8 million, $500,000, $750,000 for some of the different projects. And I think my concern is that, if we were approaching it from a perspective of, okay, do we need this? Do we really need this? Do we need this one item? That we would be looking at it differently. Like, I understand that, I really do understand what, Mark's saying, and I appreciate that this is a difficult decision, but we're at, we haven't been allowed, in my opinion, or afforded the opportunity to provide more granular input on these things. I realize that, for example, the trails projects, which I support, are put forward in the Trails Master Plan and are, an ambition that the community has, but when it comes to a year over a year, like if we were making a budget decision, if this was earlier in the year making a budget decision and we're looking at a line item of $2.8 million to do this trail, you all know, if it was $28,000, it was a big decision. We have $2.8 million, but through this process, which I feel needs more time, we have not been afforded the opportunity to get down to that level on some of these decisions. Most of the sewer and water projects, road transportation projects, I don't have an issue with, but in terms of a closer look at these projects, I feel that that hasn't been included in this process, and I think that's really the stumbling block for me right here at this point.
I'm glad to hear that, actually, because I actually brought it up to council on the first reading that I think that we are at the position where, we have our wants and our needs, and when the needs are so big that, I'm 100% behind parks, but at the price tag here, we should be looking at every opportunity to be reducing DCCs, and I suggested to council taking the whole parks item out. And there's other ways to be doing it and I don't know what effect that has on the rates, and I don't think it's a great effect, but every change is a change. And quite frankly, some people are not going to like this either, but I'm still in favor of booting all the parks out, and staff and future council are going to have to figure out a way to add them in if it's so important. And we are getting a skate park in this community because a bunch of volunteers got together and fundraised and worked towards that. We're going to get a splash park because a bunch of volunteers got together and worked towards it. And I'm hopeful that any of these parks projects that people are so they want so badly, we'll find a way as a community to put them in, because we always have in the past. I'm in favor of booting parks. Councillor Orlando.
Yeah, and Your Worship, I do recall you making that suggestion at the table. What I'm saying, not in favor of removing all of the parks projects, but just simply having a process where we take a look at this, where we step back and look at, okay, where's the Trails Master Plan at? What is realistic? What are we going to do? And especially now that we have the numbers, like, when you say, hey, we should build a trail from here to there, looks great, it fulfills a lot of goals, and it's $2.8 million. Hold on a second, we need to take a look at that. So, I'm amenable to engaging in that process here. I don't think it's ideal. I don't know if anyone else is interested in that, in looking at line items. It's certainly not an ideal way of doing things, but
I think the ideal way is boot all the parks and then ask the staff will be bringing it up to the next council if they want to make a minor amendment and add something in. But when you're down to having, it's a council decision. I know you can shake your head at me now, but if somebody is going to put a motion on the floor to boot the parks, I'm going to be accepting that motion, and council will vote on it. Right now, we have no motion. I don't know if council wants to go through, project by project, because quite frankly, council, we've had presentations and gone through projects, and those were the opportunities for council to be saying, I think we should boot these, because I did take that opportunity to bring that up. And, I'm not against it now, but we have had several opportunities to boot projects and have not. Councillor.
Your Worship, I remember you saying that, and I talked about that too, but if this is what council wants to do today, I'm amenable to that, but I think we need to remember that those parks trails are a large part of what RMR is planning, and so we need to, and I mentioned Revelstoke Accommodation Association, Resort Municipality Initiative, like there's a whole bunch of people out there that could work on these parks trails. And is this something that you want to pull? I'm amenable to that.
If anybody wants to throw an amendment onto this, this would be the time to do it. Councillor Brothers.
I just want to follow up with what Councillor Orlando said. No one is going to say that this isn't a difficult process. This is really tough what we're doing, and this has not been done for 10 years. And this is all new. It's new not only to this council, but it's and this new staff. Most of them are new here, but it's also new to this community. And I think I hear your worship, you say, well, that was your opportunity, as if we missed that opportunity. I think this is a working process. I think we have learned an awful lot by the process that we have gone through so far. But what I'm concerned about is we have little bits and pieces that keep coming up. Well, what about RMR? What about the parks? What about this? What about that? it seems to me that we should continue to learn what we need to do to get the best DCC that we can get. And if we can roll up our sleeves and carry on and continue to do it, I'm more than happy to do it. I mean, I'll sit every day of the week if that's what it takes to do it, if that's what we want to do. But I sense that we have to go through that process to get, I don't want to do patchwork. It's just, it's of concern to me to do a patchwork.
Councillor Nixon?
Just a question for staff. So if we took a parks project out, $2.8 million, as Councillor Orlando refers to, and the next council decided to bring it back in, that would be a major?
Yeah, changing projects is a major amendment.
So the challenge to the community would be, how do you want to pay for that $2.8 million project? But the other thing to remember is the elephant in the room that can't be paid by DCCs, and that's the arena. Like, we've got the arena sitting out there to look at too.
Let's deal with one mess at a time.
Your Worship, just a little bit of, I guess, clarity on what those parks DCCs are, what percentage of total DCCs they are, just so that you understand. I think there's a lot of value in the parks DCCs projects. Most of the cost of those projects is going to taxpayers. A smaller portion is going to development. And so really the development portion of DCCs is supplementing the community's contribution. It's not the other way around. For single family, it's worth about 3.7% of the total of about 18,300. For for commercial, it's $3.47 of the $104 is the parks DCCs.
3%.
So I guess what I'm saying is foregoing that revenue stream actually increases the burden on the taxpayers for projects that have been identified as a very high priority. These aren't wish list items. These are items that were identified in a public process in the Parks Master Plan. It's a shame that Mr. Donato's not here today to speak about it, but that was a rigorous process that came to council. The final plan was accepted by council, I believe, at some point in 2017 or early 2018. That was the basis for using these numbers in the DCC process. Now, the actual cost estimates were done by McElhaney as a result of looking at similar projects elsewhere. So, literally unit rate sort of cost estimates. One of the things with this $2.8 million project that's being discussed, the RMR to Nickel Road project, most of this is likely going to be on private property. It's been identified as a very high priority in the Trails Master Plan. I think we can all acknowledge that there is a lack of pedestrian facilities to the resort, which is our major tourism destination. This is something that as we develop with RMR future plans for that area, so things like a golf course or future residential development in there, this trail could be part of that. Now, RMR might get what are called DCC credits or rebates for parks if they contribute this project. So there are trade-offs for this, right? So I think it's important to understand that we wouldn't be proceeding with a project like this unless all the pieces were in the right order. But we've got 7 projects listed in the parks DCCs, and some of them are easy, some of them are quite difficult to get together. But if we don't raise some money, we won't have any contributing funds from development. And we know that a lot of these projects are in Arrow Heights, and we know that a lot of the development in the future is in Arrow Heights. And so, from my perspective, this is a prime candidate for DCCs, and it would be a shame to lose that opportunity.
Well, it has been a rigorous process to go through the Parks and Rec.
This has been a rigorous process too. And I guess the reason why I brought it up at the first time is that any opportunity that we can to recognize that DCCs are going up, and I having worked on lots of projects in this community over the years, I know that when an important project comes up, this community is going to support it. And we have ways of making things get built and ways of things happening in this town. Somebody had their hand up. Councillor Orlando.
Yeah, Your Worship, just for clarity, I'm not picking on this particular trail, I just singled it out because it's the largest line item under the Parks project, and that, to me, is part of the problem with, for example, a council sitting here at this stage saying, let's nix this one because that's going to fit our numbers, in that the whole list of project, the whole list is something that needs to be assessed, and I just feel, to summarize it, I feel the best process for me at this point would be to say, I don't think we're there yet. I think we need to have another look at the projects and get closer towards something that's towards acceptable. There were 4 or 5 items, including some of the biggest ticket ones, that were deferred in the latest version. I would be happy with more than that, and I think we would get ourselves to a more acceptable position. And I'm really concerned. I'm really concerned that the message will be two main concerns. Number one, that will have a dampening effect, that will have a net negative effect on revenue for the city if we impose additional costs on development that stalls development. And number two, I think that this issue has engendered so much opposition that I'm concerned about the future of this, of passing something that a lot of people have acknowledged at the table, councillors have acknowledged at the table today, is not ideal, not satisfactory. What is the future of this going forward? Is it really the best step to pass something that we kind of hold our nose and say this got closer to where we're at, as opposed to something that more people are comfortable with and will last?
We have an amended motion on the floor. Is there any more comments? Councillor Sauls.
Your Worship, I just want to ask, again, Councillor Orlando, when we're talking about major projects that have been removed or deferred, we've sat for 4 years, we've done through parks, we've done through many other things for the community as a whole, so we've piecemealed some of those projects, saying this is what we need to go forward in a lot of iterations over the past 4 years. And so we're down to the nth hour where you're suggesting that we should pull a few more projects. Is there a couple projects that you want to talk about that should be pulled? Should we be discussing this at this time? Or should we just say we need to have one more meeting and go through things to go from there? And then my next question will be to the staff. How does that work?
My feeling, definitely the latter. Staff has invested lots of time in looking at this, and I think we could have direction and another meeting saying that, we took some steps forward with the deferrals and got something that I feel is closer to what's acceptable to people, and they use their expertise to try to prioritize. And just to sort of a case in point, I noticed the dog off-leash part was one of the things that got bumped off the list, and that was just, again, that was just me picking on the first thing I saw there when we were having a discussion, and I sort of feel bad that, perhaps was mine or someone else's doing, but I just don't really like the a council-directed process where we, say, how about this one right here? Because these justifications ultimately need to be made to the ministry, and I'm sure staff also has a prioritized list as far as what's on here.
Councillor Brothers.
In that vein, when we're doing budgets and we say, okay, we'll do this project, we do this project, we have the opportunity every year of looking at the budgets and saying, well, you know what, we don't have the money to do this, or maybe it's not really that important, so we'll defer it and we'll defer it. The DCCs, we have a bit different problem, because when we focus on what projects we're going to do, we're setting up some DCC numbers that affect the developers and it affect the rest of the community and so affect the rest of the community. So it's a much more important situation. So yeah, I'm more in favor of looking at those again and seeing whether there's something we should do with that because it does affect the DCCs and how we play with that.
Councillor Sells.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, Councillor, when we talk about having another look at this list and going to defer, and I go back to the last 4 years where we've sat around the tables and we've said, okay, these are the projects that we need to move forward, and then so our consultants have put together that list that we as a council have said we need to do, or infrastructure that needs to be dealt with. So those are the things that are on that list that we're going to relook at, that we've looked at once before, either through the budget process or through committee process, or through the fact that we need to put new pipes in underground or those sorts of things. So my question is, if we defer those so we can lower down those prices, at some point, future councils are going to have to look at that and say, okay, now we don't have the funds. We can't run a 3-foot main through the city of town because we don't have and so that's kind of where I'm hesitant to say we need to start pulling projects when these may be major to-dos. And we've sat around the table for the last 4 years looking at projects and saying, okay, I think this is what the community wants. We've gone to the consultation process with the community. The community said, yeah, that's what we want. So we've seen some sort of projects come forward and a lot of donated money, but a lot of city money, DCC money has gone to those projects. So then my question is, are we doing the community any justice at this point by, at the nth hour, looking at things that we've sat around the table for the last 4 years and saying, okay, now maybe we were wrong because we want to lower that dollar value? That's a question.
And I agree with you. I think that is a factor that we must take into consideration. That's very important. But I guess where I'm looking at this is that there are projects and there are projects. And an example, it's not part of this, but an example is the roof for the arena. We've been talking about the roof for the arena and the $7 million cost forever. We keep putting it off because we don't have to deal with it right away. It's far down the road. So I'm just thinking, are there some of those types of projects that we can take a look at and say, okay, that's one of them. And I think, when we're at this point where we're trying to make some really serious decisions, I'd rather go through that exercise, even if we come up with the same thing we're sitting here now, than not having gone through it.
Councillor.
I think council knowledge that the only thing we should be looking at today is whether council wants to take the parks projects off the table. I think the water and the sewer and the transportation are the core services of the community, and I just am saying leave those alone and only look at whether you want to look at that 3% with the parks. That's just my sense this late in the game.
Well, at the last meeting, we were unhappy with the rates, and we put it back to staff and consultants to look at projects, deferring them so that we could bring those rates down. I look at where we started this process, which absolutely nobody was happy with. Well, maybe the consultant was happy with it, but nobody else was happy with it. We had made changes, then we sent it back to look at projects. It's come back down again. I'm concerned that we will be doing a disservice to the community if we don't do something. And, I'm fine with doing something with parks because I feel that we will, as a community, fix that. Maybe what we should have done 3.5 years ago is we should have booted the arena roof off of any talking, because it keeps getting brought up, and it seems to me we do an engineer study on it every year, every other year, and it hasn't changed. It's not part of the DCC, it's not in the discussion, and I would rather actually be talking about building a whole new arena and curling club or whatever it is than talking about fixing a $7 million or $8 million roof. So I still think that the process we went through worked. We got a lot of people that are engaged in watching what's going on. We have a lot of people that aren't paying attention because they're expecting that their representatives around the table are going to look after the community well into the future, and that's really what we're talking about today. I don't think that we as a council are qualified, nor we want to be going through every project we can, and we've gone through the projects with staff. We've had 2 presentations on it, and there was opportunity to be asking questions and looking at it and the validity of it. Again, we sent it back and said, look at the projects again, and they did. I am not unhappy with where we're sitting right now. So if somebody's going to put a motion to make a change, they should do it, because I'm going to be calling question fairly quickly. We have an amended motion on the floor right now to go into amending the rates and going into second reading. Councilor Brothers.
I'd just like to know, what's the process if I would like to have another meeting?
Put a motion on the floor and get it seconded.
Then
So,
I'm just trying to follow through on what the process might be, because, if the process is going to be council wants to meet and wants to review individually the parks projects and decide this one might be in, this one might be out, that's going to imply the need for at least that additional meeting, and then a meeting subsequent to that, because then the rate schedules need to be recalculated depending upon what was taken out and what was left in. You can't go read a bylaw as important as this, not knowing the impact on rates. If council wanted at this meeting to simply eliminate the parks rates in their entirety, we can all do the math by subtracting all of those items from all of the tables, and that would be in order. But it really is going to take 2 meetings for council to go through that process, to be considering third reading of the bylaw and then submission to the ministry. And my caution to council is what you're probably doing is you're kicking the ball forward such that the decision on adoption will be made by the new council.
but I'm assuming if how this process unfolds, if we're talking about another meeting, I would say that the feeling that I'm getting is that some people want to talk about any project, not just parks projects. So it's not just that, it would be, anything would be on the table.
Then it becomes, probably a lot more things can change on these tables, implying the recalculation,
So-
resetting of rates, a bylaw being brought forward so that council can then look at what the impact of those decisions are.
So I'm just, a question about process. If we have an amended motion on the floor to approve it in second reading, if the majority of council wanted to have this meeting to go through, would the process be turn this down and make a motion for another meeting?
No, I think you'd probably approve that and then follow the same process at third reading. So your first motion would be to read the bylaw a third time as it would stand after this amendment has been incorporated into it, and then entertain a motion to further amend it by doing whatever the decisions on Project Fate is. But it's going to take you 2 meetings. Yeah, there's going to be one to decide what projects are on and off. Does that make sense to you? Yes. Okay.
Did I say that this is a rigorous process sometime along here? So I'm still not 100% sure. You're suggesting that we approve it in second reading. Now, then there would be a motion to have another meeting. If people were not inclined to do that, we would go to third reading and it would be approved or...
That's right.
Okay.
What would you ask, see if there was a motion for third reading today?
Okay. So we're back at second reading as amended. Phew. Any last comments? All those in favor?
Sorry, question.
Yes.
One more question. I just want to be clear. If we turned down this, what are the repercussions of turning this? It's over.
Yeah, the process is over.
amended motion, second reading. Councillor Randall.
No, I'm happy with the process that's outlined by Mr. Chabot in that, staff has just been through the process where they analyzed the projects. There was a few removed, deferred there, and I imagine that having just been, the staff and the consultant just been through that process, have the ability to take a look at it one more time and factor in some of the calculations they've made, and hopefully through that process we can get to something that is more supportable at the table. So as the process to go through second reading, and then I'm not too sure if Councillor Brothers is interested in putting a motion forward, then we'll be happy with that. Mr. Chabot.
Your Worship, just to be clear, the process that staff and the consultant went through was as directed by council. Council had a desire to see rates reduced, and so as the discussion today has gone on, some projects have been deferred for consideration in a future DCC. I don't think anybody on staff or the consultant is saying these projects are not going to be needed as a result of growth in the community. So it wouldn't be sending it back to staff again and saying find creative means. It would be a council deciding, I guess, which were priority projects and which projects they thought the community may well do without going forward in the future. Because that kind of direction wouldn't leave us anywhere.
Councillor Solzner.
I'm just wondering about a timeline, if somebody put in another meeting on, what are we looking at for a timeline? Some of you are going away to UBCM.
I think that's a discussion for the motion if it comes forward.
Okay, thank you.
I want to kind of keep us on track. We're still on the amended motion. Yes.
And the only other point that I would make on this is that, I understand your point, Mr. Chabot, that, staff has done their best, and maybe it's just a situation where if staff can explain to us where we're at and we have a comfort level, then it is what it is, and we have to deal with that. But as I said, it's very hard on such a difficult decision, such an important decision for this community. From my perspective, when I'm not sure of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, to put up my hand and absolutely support it. So, if it takes getting a little bit more information to put me over the hump, then I would rather do that than see it all fall apart.
Absolutely. I respect your need for as accurate information before making an important decision like this. That's absolutely fine. I would repeat my caution that we're very likely looking at this being a decision on vote on adoption by a new council. And that introduces a whole new level of risk.
Your Worship, so can we ask some of those questions at this point with the staff here, the consultants here?
Yes.
Yes.
So
It's part of a motion that's on the floor is this amended motion of projects.
Okay.
So
my question, Mr. Thomas, when we look at some of the projects that have been deferred, with all due respect to all the reports that you've written to us, can you just elaborate a little bit on some of the deferred projects that have been done to get us to this meeting?
Your Worship, the 4 projects were deferred. So the first one is the bridge upgrade of the Illicilla Bridge, and that project was estimated at about $6.8 million. So that has been deferred in this DCC bylaw. I believe there was I think it was a 10% allocation to the existing residents or existing community on that project. So it was mostly shown as a development project in this, and that's why the transportation costs have dramatically decreased from that project. The other big one was the eastern access to Highway 1, which was a $4 million project, and that was safety and capacity improvements to the Townley Street and Trans-Canada Highway intersection. Between these 2 projects, I would say the bridge project is probably the most concerning for me. When we start looking at, I understand where council's concerns are, but we need to look at this as being a 20-year project or a 20-year list of projects. And we're going to get caught out if we haven't started planning and started raising funds for these projects if they are necessary. I think these projects of these two, the bridge upgrade is probably the one that we're going to get to the point where in 20 years we're going to say, okay, the capacity of the bridge, if growth happens at the rate that it's expected to, we're going to get to the point where the capacity on the bridge is probably going to start looking like a problem. And I think that's a concern for me. I think it's appropriate that council has deferred it, as per council's direction. I think this is an appropriate decision, but I would caution that we don't leave it off the table. It needs to be included in the next couple of years in studies, making sure that we know what the actual cost is, maybe even getting some conceptual design work done, so that we can actually work out when it's required, how it's required, and what it looks like. But when we look at the other projects that are still in the bylaw and haven't been deferred yet, I would say we need to look at it with a 20-year horizon. It's very difficult to look at and say, okay, well, do we for sure need this in the next 20 years? And I would say that a lot of thought has gone into these projects. We've removed projects from the previous bylaw. We have already removed, aside from these deferred projects, we've already removed projects that were in the existing bylaw because they're no longer required. And I think that's, Ms. Becker and myself, we've probably spent, I'm guessing, 6 hours or more talking to council about these projects. And I feel like there's a lot of information that's gone at council, and I understand why it's difficult to work out what projects might or might not be, in your mind, the highest priority. What I can say is that the consulting team and the staff team that worked on this, and it wasn't just myself, it wasn't just Ms. Becker, it was a team of consultants and a team of staff members that worked on this project list. And this was a list that was developed from all of those previous plans. It's not a wish list, it's a list of projects that's been previously identified in plans and identified as priorities in those plans. And we didn't pick every project that was in those plans, we picked the highest priority ones, and then we looked to see how much of those would be related to growth in the community. I can tell you that within the next 20 to 40 years, we've got way more projects than are on this list. Like way more, and not related to growth. We've got projects that are going to really challenge the next councils over the next decades as to how they're going to find funding for these projects, separate from these growth ones. And we've talked about an arena. That's a heroic project for this community to raise funds for. A new arena could be, in the realm of $20 million. So, we start talking about, wish list items and looking to the future and what are we providing for this community. A 20-year time frame is difficult to wrap our heads around. But I'd suggest that in the next 20 years, should the community think, yeah, it would be great to have a new arena? Is that something that as a community we want to start thinking about? Because if we do want a new arena, we want to start thinking about it soon so that we're not borrowing those funds. Instead, we actually have some money put aside. Because every dollar that you borrow, it's going to cost you at least $1.50 in payments, basically, in total. So there are a couple of other deferred projects with the dog off-leash park at $85,000. This was identified in the Parks, Recreation, Culture Master Plan from 2011. There was no location identified for this one specifically, but it's certainly something that I would say that the community, as we grow, we will need to look at more off-leash areas. We have, I think from the bylaw perspective, we have a lot of, human-animal conflicts in the community with dogs off-leash, and I think providing safe spaces for those dogs to run around off-leash and for their owners to feel happy that that's happening, and for people who don't want to be around dogs to know that that's the area that those dogs are going to be in. I think that's important. The last one was the irrigation in Centennial Park. I'm not sure which plan this one came from, but that was listed at $70,000. And that was, as we grow as a community, and we're seeing increased pressure on the use of the fields. And we know that the demographic that's coming to town is looking for recreational opportunities. We see the ball diamonds are full just about every night. The ball's on down there. We see the soccer fields full. These are activities that will increase, and we will need to be providing, an additional space for people to recreate in the future. And something with irrigation is important. So we've removed those projects from this current list and deferred them for future consideration. I don't think that they should be considered off the table. I think they should be considered deferred and for future consideration. It doesn't mean that there won't be other projects that come in, and certainly as we get a better handle of what growth looks like over the next couple of years, and if the projection changes as well, because it's not just based on historic growth, it's based on the projection. If our projection changes, well then maybe we need to include even more projects, as was previously discussed. If we had double the growth rate, we may actually need another treatment plant, another sewer treatment plant, or a different type of treatment plant to meet our needs. And this $13 million project that we've applied for a grant for would not be the end of the story in the near future. We would be looking at many tens of millions of dollars more soon.
Councilor Brothers?
Could I go back to the sewage treatment plant, because that's the big nut to crack on this. Have you gone to the ministry and asked whether or not we can put a $13 million number on it as opposed to a $30 million number on it?
Your Worship, I think I answered that before in the sense that this is directly tied to our grant application, and to put a lesser number when you know that in the next 20 years we are likely going to have to do the full upgrade. Personally, I wouldn't be putting my professional reputation behind a report that suggested otherwise.
Any other comments to staff on the projects? And going back to the motion, we have an amended motion on the floor. All those in favor? Against? Motion is defeated. Questions from media?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to clarify next steps at this point. I know we were discussing a little bit, but I just want to make sure I'm really clear on what the next steps are now that the motion is defeated.
It's over. Any other questions?
Nope.
Motion to adjourn. Others, all in favor, motion's carried.
Listen, it's a tough decision.